Hello, everybody. Welcome to our UFC 263 preview show. I am John Pollock, and I have not come solo today. We have the 1-2 punch of the MMA coverage here at postwrestling.com. I'm talking about Phil Chertok. Phil, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, John. I'm doing even better now that I'm talking to you.
And joining us as well, the man behind everything MMA on the site, Eryk Marcotte, is with us. Eryk, how are you?
I'm fantastic and happy to be here today.
How does it feel, Eryk, that after years now, Wei Ting has finally nailed your name? He's starting to finally enter this groove where he has learned and moved on. So we have all caught up now.
I feel fulfilled, like, you know, all these years of hard work, being a Patriot, they finally paid off, and Wei's learned my name.
Yes. Absolutely no thanks to you, who never pointed this out to us. It had to be a third party that informed us after years that we have been mispronouncing the man's name. But
I never would have either, so it's all.
But it's just gone on forever, literally forever. Phil, I am pronouncing your name correct, right? After all these years.
Why don't you say it and I'll let you know.
Well, I won't lie. Okay, before we started doing these shows, I had never said your last name before, ever. You're just Phil. I had never any reason to say hi, Phil Chertok. Now, is it Chertok? Chertok?
So this is a great question because actually when I was growing up, I would actually pronounce it Chertok. I don't know why I would pronounce it that way because I don't know if my parents ever said it like that. But then I later learned about the history of it. Mm-hmm. And the most accurate would probably be Chertok, as if Cher had a talk show. So yeah. But honestly, I hardly notice how people pronounce it so many different ways. It's not a terribly common last name, so it's all fine to me. I don't take offense to it in the slightest when somebody says it incorrectly.
So literally after 20 years of friendship, I'm glad that you have clarified that. We are here to chat about what is a pretty interesting card from the UFC on Saturday night. It's a pretty packed weekend of MMA, but you know, kind of front and center is UFC 263 that is going to feature a pair of championship rematches plus the return of Nate Diaz. I'm going to start it off with you, Phil. What jumps off of this card at you as the biggest story going into 263?
I think the biggest story for this one is how is Israel Adesanya going to bounce back after his first MMA defeat when he moved up to 205 pounds to challenge Jan Blachowicz for the light heavyweight title. So I think that's the biggest story on this card, but it is a card full of plenty of stories, including, as you mentioned, the return of Nate Diaz, a return, second helping of what was to many the fight of the year last year, and maybe Demian Maia's last fight. That's kind of my little intrigue on this one.
It would seem, Eryk, that, I mean, this Deiveson Figueiredo, Brandon Moreno fight, I think that could very well be the fight that we are all raving about on Saturday night. Going into it, it's, to me, kind of flying under the radar, but I think, like, if you've been following the embedded, like, you can see that there's certainly a built-up animosity, at least on Figueiredo's part, and I think that this is probably as action-packed a flyweight fight as the UFC could put together. I guess it's just a question of whether it's getting that kind of attention going into this card where you are underneath kind of Israel Adesanya and Nate Diaz as kind of your A-list players on this card.
Yeah, man, I am super excited for that fight. Their first fight in December of last year was arguably the best flyweight fight of all time. Certainly the greatest title fight. I mean, we have to acknowledge going into that, neither Figueiredo nor Moreno were likely at the peak of their abilities. They both had just fought on the pay-per-view prior, short training camp. Figueiredo was sick before the fight. So I'm really interested to see how this one goes now that they've had their full camps and the situation is a bit more normal.
Yeah, I would say like there were a lot of mitigating factors affecting each man's performance in that last fight. And I mean, you take out that point deduction, I think most would have seen Figueiredo retaining the championship. But I think, Phil, when you have these two that now have 5 rounds of experience with one another and you add on 5+ months of preparation, I mean, do you just look at Figueiredo here as the overall much better fighter, or do you look at the fact that Brandon Moreno has surprised us a lot throughout his career, and I think has somewhat been underestimated from his days on Tough right up until this championship fight, and if he would have been ready for Figueiredo to go 5 rounds with him?
Yeah, I think I'm certainly guilty of underestimating him frequently. And I mean, I'm not favoring him here. I do think that Figueiredo not only is the better fighter overall, but I think he also has the finishing power. But you're absolutely correct that Moreno has surprised us time and time again, especially in that last fight where it was very close. And I could see him improving over the last 5 months. So I wouldn't write him off in the slightest going into this.
Eryk, did you catch Walid Ismail's comments on Embedded that he's not the assassin baby, he's the cry baby?
Oh, wow. That's deep. That's deep. I missed that.
It's either the second or third episode, and it's as soon as the camera is isolated on Walid, I knew this was going to be gold. He did not disappoint. The man should be doing every bit of public speaking on behalf of Deiveson Figueiredo. He is the best. He is a manager right out of the 70s.
They should really just follow him around for the entirety of the Embedded series.
I would be fine with way more Walid for 6 episodes throughout the week. I would love it. Focusing on the main event, another rematch, this one between Israel Adesanya and Marvin Vettori, fighting 3 years later in the very same arena where they fought in April of 2018. On that night, Adesanya was the victor by split decision. That was only his second UFC fight. Since that time, Marvin Vettori has won his following 5 fights to get back to challenging Adesanya. And I mean, I think in the lead up to this, Phil, they have tried to make this first fight much more close than it is that we typically do when it says split decision. I thought this was a fairly easy fight to score, 2-1 for Adesanya. But at the same time, I'm not going to discount the fact that I think Marvin Vettori is a much better fighter than he was 3 years ago.
Absolutely. I agree. I think that fight was pretty easy to score, and so it should have been a clear victory for Adesanya. But there's still more to the story of that fight. Adesanya did lose the last round convincingly. Yep. He was fading as the fight progressed. And as we saw in his last fight, towards the end, he got controlled with the wrestling. And so I do think that it is a serious question here. If this fight goes into round 4 and 5 and Vettori can secure the takedown again, could be a big problem for Adesanya.
I think that's such an interesting factor, Eryk, is that Vettori came on and looked his best in that 3rd round, that we are looking at a 5-round fight on Saturday night. And with Marvin Vettori, I mean, this is one where I think Adesanya, this is the first time, at least in his UFC tenure, that you're looking at questions like, how does he bounce back from the loss earlier this year, returning to middleweight? And if people are sleeping on Marvin Vettori, he's only 27 years old. So when you're looking at that first fight to today, I think this is a very interesting fight that maybe on paper people aren't, jumping out of their seats looking at Marvin Vettori challenging for this title, but I do feel that it represents a test for Adesanya.
Yeah, I think that's worded very well. When they first announced this fight, I wasn't really excited at all, to be honest. It feels like the top middleweight challenger is Robert Whittaker right now, and this Definitely. Just kind of felt like a stop in the road for Adesanya. But earlier this week, in preparation for this weekend's card, I did rewatch that first fight. And I think I'm more excited for this main event coming out of that rewatch than I was beforehand. Like you said, it's very clear 29-28 for Israel Adesanya. The one judge who scored it for Vettori was insane, but that's pretty much normal on these cards. But regardless, the way that he comes on in that 3rd round, and he never stops pressuring forward, even when Adesanya is lighting him up, I think that can make for a potentially very interesting 5-round fight.
Do you look, Eryk, at when it comes to Adesanya, like it's amazing when you look at, when he's going up to light heavyweight, and it just seems like the sky is the limit for this guy. We're talking about John Jones. We're talking about heavyweight. Do you think that the loss to Jan earlier this year, that it kind of puts things back into focus, that this guy is tailor-made for this middleweight division. Maybe light heavyweight is something he will revisit down the road, but that is a ways away. That middleweight will be his singular focus moving forward.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, ahead of that Jan Blachowicz fight, when they were talking about heavyweight, it was insane to me. I'm not saying, obviously, Israel Adesanya is one of the best fighters in the world, but I can't imagine him fighting Stipe Miocic or Francis Ngannou. I think people are getting a bit ahead of themselves, and this is a good step back into reality for one of the best fighters in the world.
In a weird way, Phil, I could see that loss. It's a temporary step back, but there is a silver lining to it for Adesanya. Like, could you imagine, like, if he wins that fight, I just don't know if it's, short term, it creates all these potential big fights, but I think ultimately, I think it was a reality check. The size was a big factor in that fight. And as well for Marvin Vettori, like, what do you take from that fight if you're Marvin Vettori, knowing the success you had in that third round where he was able to get those takedowns on Adesanya, and if he can keep that pressure, it's interesting just to look at Adesanya, who had almost looked unbeatable up until this past year, and now you do have some intrigue given that he was somewhat humanized.
Definitely. And that's also what makes this more intriguing than merely the fact that it's just a rematch with an improved Vettori. There were the lessons that maybe Vettori can draw from the first fight, and then maybe the lessons from the Blachowicz fight as well. And I do agree that it is probably better for him that he lost that fight in the short term. Well, in the short term, it would have set up some big fights, but in the long term, especially if he can get this win, he can establish himself as one of the great middleweights of all time. And once he does that, that can open up all sorts of possibilities. So I think focusing on that is the right thing to do now in his career.
Eryk, who is the most likely to upset Robert Whittaker's title hopes and leapfrog him to fight the winner of this?
Oh, very tough. I'd say about anybody in the top 10.
Because I take no guarantee possible, because after this fight, everyone was, it's got to be Robert Whittaker now. I do not take same reaction as if Leon Edwards wins on Saturday night. Until they sign it on the dotted line and Edwards or Whittaker are in the cage facing the champion, that is when I will accept that they have gotten their title fight.
I believe Dana White had an interview earlier this week where he dropped the classic line, the classic Robert Whittaker. He just doesn't want to fight, man. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen.
Dedicate their entire lives to fighting. They just wake up one day and say, you know what? I don't want to fight for the championship. It has nothing to do with the fact that I don't want a 4-week turnaround, that I have an unbelievable quarantine period given where I live. No, none of that. There's never any financial considerations either. Like, no fighter. You don't want to fight for this amount? You're not a fighter. I love the Dana White, just the drop down menu of reasons into the fighter psyche.
It's strange though, because that's sort of like a turnaround on this one. Like, obviously he's said that type of stuff before, but the first time when this fight was announced, somebody asked him about Whittaker, and he was actually very graceful in how he answered. He said, well, Whittaker just fought and he wanted more time, so this is sort of like an opportunity in between. Like, so I wonder if something has transpired in the meantime that has gotten him sour about it.
Well, he did seem very high on Robert Whittaker on that Submission Radio interview earlier this week. I mean, for all intents and purposes, joking aside, like, Robert Whittaker should absolutely be fighting the winner of this fight. I guess, if Vettori pulls this off, there is certainly that argument of running this back immediately with Adesanya. But I mean, you have to wait to see how this fight turns out. But Whittaker, in theory, keywords, in theory, would be next in line here. Nate Diaz coming back It's his first fight since the Jorge Masvidal fight all the way back in November of 2019. How big of a factor do you think this is, Phil? Nate Diaz coming back in 2021 and what he means to this pay-per-view?
I think it's a big deal for the MMA fans. I mean, people love Nate Diaz and his brother Nick, and so people always get excited about seeing them. In terms of what this does for the pay-per-view, I mean, I'm sort of flabbergasted with pay-per-view predictions at this point, with what we've seen in the last few months of just nonsense on pay-per-view. I do think he's going to be a draw, but his last appearance was a loss. This kind of reminds me of when he came back and fought Anthony Pettis, and he wasn't the main event. It was like his thinking is he gets this win and that puts him back in a mega fight right after it. This is a lot more difficult of an opponent, though.
Eryk, for you, looking at Nate Diaz, I mean, the fact that this is going to be it's a non-title fight, yet it will be a 5-round fight. I see that being like the only way to look at this for a positive for Nate Diaz. I mean, I don't see many people picking Nate Diaz, but the extra 2 rounds, to me, that's only going to help Nate Diaz. Like, if he is going to somehow pull something miraculous out here, it's going to be, to me, turning it on late in the fight. And I imagine that that's got to be the thinking here. But I mean, give Nate Diaz credit. This is a really tall task that he has taken on to come back and fight Leon Edwards. And I mean, it's for Leon Edwards, I mean, a significant opponent for him that, I mean, stylistically, Edwards should win this fight, but does the 5 rounds change any of the calculus for you?
Not in the slightest. I mean, Nate Diaz, Nate Diaz is has very good cardio, but his reputation as a guy who just turns it on in the 4th and 5th rounds, he's won like maybe 1 championship round in his entire career. That's reality. He's not his brother. Before the fight was initially announced, I don't know if there's a single fighter at lightweight or welterweight I would have imagined fighting Nate Diaz less than Leon Edwards. This is a fight I never thought I'd see, and maybe I'll be proven very wrong, but I don't see it being competitive either. I think he's going to hit Nate with a lot of elbows, bust him open, and he might even get a finish.
To be fair to Nate Diaz, he has made it to the 5th round all of 2 times in his career. It's primarily like this guy has only had
3 times.
Yeah.
Where's he fought? He had
Benson,
the Conor
Henderson.
fight. He had the Benson fight.
That's it, right?
How many other 5-round fights has he even been in?
Oh, okay. He was it. Well, there was the Masvidal fight was a 5-rounder.
It was a 5-rounder, but they only won.
But
3.
he did. Yeah, I thought there was one more. I guess I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Surprise.
So neither of you even entertained that Nate Diaz can even win this fight.
Not really.
I mean, I will entertain it because he's a good fighter, but he is definitely a significant underdog, and he deserves to be. So, yeah.
See,
yeah, well said. Like, crazier things have happened in MMA than Nate Diaz beating Leon Edwards. It's not impossible, just improbable.
So I have a very similar feeling as I did going back. This was like 5.5 years ago when he had a year layoff and came back to fight Michael Johnson. And this is when Michael Johnson is kind of, he's in a much better position in that lightweight division. And I thought, man, this is going to be the funeral for Nate Diaz, where a lot of fans are going to be very sad to see Nate Diaz just get walloped by this dude. And he went into that fight, and it may not have looked good early for Nate Diaz, but he comes back. He wins that by decision. I was completely stunned. And that pivots him, that famous post-fight interview that ends up he gets the replacement to fight Conor McGregor several months later. And it's, the career-making year for Nate Diaz is 2016. Now, again, this is 5.5 years later. Nate's 36. I am certainly not picking him to win this fight. But, man, I've been proven wrong in the past with Nate Diaz when I've underestimated the game passing him by when it clearly had not in 2015.
And to be fair, we've kind of seen Leon Edwards slow down a bit in 5-round fights before against Rafael dos Anjos and even Donald Cerrone. So perhaps there's something to that.
Well, I would say just for fan interest in the event of a Nate Diaz win, I think it just throws a grenade into the title plans at 170 pounds because a Nate Diaz win, I think he has the potential of leapfrogging just about anyone up to and including Colby Covington. And if you're Kamaru Usman with his style against a name like Nate Diaz, dude, he's signing that contract the second Nate Diaz is out of the octagon on Saturday.
Undoubtedly.
But I feel like Nate Diaz might not even make that call out. Let's go theoretically he wins. We're really playing fantasy here. He wins and he has some epic post fight. I think he calls out the winner of Poirier versus Conor. You're
probably right. Like, he has made it very clear, like a title is not in his, that's not what is guiding his career continuing at this stage of things. And I think you're right. You're looking at, the option of fighting Kamaru Usman. It's Nate Diaz is the A side of that equation. Fighting a Poirier or fighting Connor, it's just night and day. So I think you're right. Another weird pairing that I think would do outstanding, just in terms of interest because of the dynamics involved, would be Nate Diaz and Colby Covington. But again, that's a very bad fight for Nate Diaz.
A very bad fight, but you're right. That would get a lot of attention.
If this is, do you guys see Nate, again, win or lose, do you see him sticking around at welterweight? Do you like this weight class for him, Eryk?
I don't like the weight class for him. I think he fits better at 155, but at the same time, I don't see him ever cutting that weight again. There's no point at this point. Like, as you said, he doesn't seem like he's that interested in championships. And if he's not interested in fighting for the lightweight championship, why do that weight cut? You can fight guys like Dustin Poirier and Conor McGregor at 170. They will agree.
Phil, in terms of the top 3 fights, how many decisions do you think we're getting? How many are going the distance?
1.
You think we're going to?
Yes.
Who do you see getting stoppages?
I think I can see Figgy getting the finish.
Very possible.
And I think Leon Edwards is going to bust up that eye a little bit too much, and Nate Diaz isn't going to be able to make it to rounds 4 and 5.
I can certainly see Adesanya and Vettori going the full 5. I mean, there's the potential all 3 could go the full 5. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility either.
Yeah, I mean, I can see a finish maybe in the middleweight fight, depending on how much Adesanya can catch Vettori coming in. But yeah, if Vettori can weather that storm and turn it into a wrestling match, it definitely has the potential to go 5 rounds. We talked about the Edwards fight. That could go 5 rounds, even though that's not what I just predicted. Hopefully we won't be on air at 2 a.m, John.
Yeah, it could be 3. We've also got Demian Maia and Belal Muhammad. Demian Maia is kind of on the fence right now if he's going to fight again after this. It may not. If this were to be his final fight, it's quite the career that Demian Maia has had. And for Belal Muhammad, I mean, hardly a layup that he's got here coming off that no contest with Leon Edwards. This is, I don't care at what age Demian Maia is fighting at. The fact is, this dude, he's coming off the loss to Gilbert Burns. But before that, I mean, 3 wins prior to that. It's a very interesting stylistic fight, Eryk.
100%, yeah. I mean, even at his current age, 43 years old or however old Demian is, he's still a tough matchup. He's still a ranked welterweight for a reason. I like this fight. I think it's going to be really interesting, and it's harder to call than it might look on paper with the veteran against the guy kind of rising through the ranks. I think Maia has a chance in this one, but I still lean towards Belal Muhammad.
I was looking this up. So Demian Maia, in his career, he has 10 losses. Listen to these names, okay? These are the people that can claim victories over Demian Maia. Nate Marcotte, Anderson Silva, Mark Munoz, Chris Weidman, Jake Shields, Rory McDonald, Tyron Woodley, Colby Covington, Kamaru Usman, Gilbert Burns. That's a pretty stacked list. If you're going to have 10 losses on your record, that's probably the nicest list you can possibly show someone as context for those 10 losses.
Yeah, I mean, he's had a hell of a career. He's been in championship contention for, over a decade now. So when you look through his resume, he's pretty much only fought the best of the best throughout his UFC run.
Just quickly taking a glance at the undercard, a few fights that stand out. One of importance is Joanne Calderwood and Lauren Murphy. This could provide the next victory for Valentina Shevchenko, whoever comes out victorious on Saturday. And we've also got Brad Riddell, training partner of Israel Adesanya, taking on Drew Dober. What's standing out for you, Eryk, underneath?
I think the one that you just said, Dober vs. Riddell, that has some fight of the night potential there. Murphy and Calderwood's important for the reasons you outlined. What else do we have here? We have Hakeem Dawodu. He's returning against Movsar Evloev. I'm pretty high on Dawodu. He's been a good fighter for the most part. I think, a couple performances ago where he fought, I'll look it up, Yoshinari Hori, with the TKO with the head kick. that was his best performance. And after I watched that, I was like, okay, this guy really does have the potential to go through to the division. He's won his last 5 fights. I think he's someone to keep an eye out on the prelims here.
Phil, anything on the undercard you want to touch on?
Just outside of everything that you two mentioned, Chase Hooper is also on this card. Very young, interesting submission fighter. He got a win in his last fight. And he's a unique fighter with he's rough around the edges, but he's got a lot of potential and opportunity to grow. And so I'm curious to see what he's done in the last few months.
Yeah, he's got to come out and avenge his dad's loss to Jake Paul.
That's right.
Did both of you watch the fight on Sunday?
I did not.
I did, yes.
You did?
I watched it, yes. Yes, I did.
Any surprising takes that you took away from that the 8-round circus?
I will say the Logan Paul came in very good shape, and he was very well coached. So, I mean, he kind of actually surprised me. I mean, I know he didn't do much in there, but he didn't bite on the feints early, and he had enough energy he kind of won the last round. I'd have to go back and watch it, but I remember that he beat Floyd to the punch several times in the last round. And so, I mean, look, it wasn't it was a Floyd exhibition that he doesn't prepare for against a 200-pound guy. But, I mean, Logan Paul definitely took it seriously. And so that was actually kind of surprising.
Where do you go from that for Logan Paul? I mean, he comes out of this with the bragging of lasting 8 rounds with Floyd Mayweather Jr. Like, this experiment continues, but where do you go next? It's kind of a weird pivot of where you go after doing this exhibition.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly no real bigger names in the boxing. I mean, they've been trying to call out Conor. So, I mean, that's something that maybe down the road that could happen. Logan's, of course, made appearance at WrestleMania. Maybe there's more he can do in that world. There's the potential for a Jake Paul, Logan Paul fight. I'm sure that would generate all sorts of nonsense. But I think the quote unquote fight to make is if Jake Paul is able to win his next fight, you do Floyd versus Jake Paul. That's just sort of what I what I would put together if I was, one of the Ringling brothers.
What's your interest level, Eryk, in Jake Paul, Tyron Woodley in the summer?
About the same as my interest level in all the rest of these Paul brother fights, which is a 0.
Wow. I'm more intrigued to see that one than I had none for this past weekend. But yeah. for Woodley and Jake Paul, like I will probably pay for my ticket to the circus for that one.
Oh boy.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Eryk, but you can have
40-year-old Tyron Woodley with arthritis in his hands. Yeah,
what if
a hell of a night?
What if Jake Paul calls out Yaroslav Amosov?
Interestful.
This is like a very good fight that Bellator has on Friday night, but I think this is more indicative. Like, if you are in the MMA bubble, everyone is aware of this fight. But to me, Bellator, like this card on Friday night, to me shows what the ceiling is of Bellator when you have a bigger UFC card and just a reality of where Bellator is in the general conversation. Like, this is a great title fight with Douglas Lima and Amosov. Paul Daly is fighting. Aaron Pico is fighting. Like, this is as quality a Bellator card as you're going to get. But Eryk, I just think that there's so much UFC that over all of these years of Saturday after Saturday after Saturday, like, that is what the general fans' consumption of MMA is. It's UFC and not a whole lot of appetite for anything beyond that. It's going to be your diehard fan, your Eryk Marcotte, so to speak.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, the UFC is pretty much a weekly product at this point. I mean, how many weekends throughout the year aren't they running a fight card? That's not even counting the Contender Series cards, the Ultimate Fighter's back. There's so much UFC content that's hard for a Bellator card, which is, going to take up a minimum of like 3 hours of your time if you're only watching the main card to catch that casual fan's interest. And in terms of name value, it's not really there as good as the fighters are. Like, as you said, Douglas Lima versus Amosov, that's a great fight. They have AJ McKee and Patricio Pitbull coming up. That's a fantastic fight.
That's a huge fight for them, yeah.
But it's not going to get them out of the position they're in now.
I mean, you've got Nick Newell on the prelims, and it's I don't sense any buzz for Nick Newell fighting on Friday night. So anyway, Eryk, you will be covering Bellator though for the site.
I will,
John. So John, I'm glad that you brought that up, because I have been asking Eryk this, and as we know, there was a big PFL card last night, and I've actually been more interested in the PFL this season. I think they've done a better job of building stars. And just from your perspective, I know that, Post does coverage of Bellator. What do you think it would take to either include PFL coverage? And I mean, what would it take for them to include PFL coverage for Post, or to surpass Bellator perhaps and to take over coverage in that regard? This is sort of a weird theoretical question.
I mean, I kind of have to gauge it based on like I just don't get any feedback on PFL. So, I mean, it's not to say like I'm against the idea of it, but it's, you're right. Like, I think PFL and Bellator, it's like they're very close in scope. And I think that PFL, like personally, I've been following this season, and I think it's, there are a lot of elements I enjoy about PFL. But to me, it's such a drop off, I think, of interest. Like, I think for a site like ours, it's already very heavily focused on pro wrestling. And I would say that the like MMA, it's probably 75-25. And once you're even splitting it that much more when you're taking out UFC from the equation. So I just think it's not a whole lot of great demand for that coverage, even though I think PFL, you could argue this week with Clarissa Shields, it's between her and Kayla Harrison, like those are two very marketable stars that PFL has, that I'm curious if PFL is kind of able to grow upon that, and people getting into to their format of having the points and such that, they've gone through several seasons now. I think they're doing it like in a pretty easy to follow way. Like I will say this, watching those early Bellator tournaments, like when they had multiple tournaments going on all at once, it was insane to try and keep track of who is in this tournament, injury replacements. You had a dozen tournaments going on at the same time. PFL, it's a pretty straightforward process. They fight several times a year, and then we have the playoffs, and then on New Year's Eve, we crown a winner. It goes back to the point of what is the demand out there for non-UFC MMA?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess it's just, I wonder what they can do to continue to grow. I think they've done a good job, and I'm surprised they don't put it out there more that they've, paid out $12 million or whatever it is in terms of tournament winners. That's a huge amount of money. And, with all the talk about, who's getting paid in MMA, I promote that more.
Yeah. And I mean, ultimately, is it going to be a sustainable plan for them? Because I will guarantee like they are not making that money back on live event ticket sales or their ESPN Plus deal.
Yeah, it does sound like they're hoping for something better down the line. And
they
yeah,
have a lot of investment money. Like they made all those announcements. Like they've been able to raise a lot of capital with the idea. I think this is like everyone's play is that, you've seen this gigantic streaming and television deal that the UFC has, and other combat sports groups that are hoping to land their own giant deal. And it's, investing that money with the hope that you'll land that gigantic deal, that this all pays off for itself. And that's, I think, honestly, like Kayla Harrison, it's going to be a very interesting decision at the end of the year. She's said her contract is up, and she could stay in the PFL and make really good money, or she could go to the UFC and, she will invariably not be making $1 million, but she will be fighting the top women, and there's a larger ceiling there. But I mean, there's certainly an argument for someone that just wants to stay in PFL, and someone like a Lance Palmer has won 2 of these tournaments with, that's sizable, life-changing money.
I do think if Kayla Harrison left the PFL and went to the UFC, it would only be for a big fight, main event type promotional thing where she probably would make $1 million in a fight. I would think, because why else would she go? Just to prove she's the best in the world. I mean, maybe that, but that doesn't seem to be what's motivating her right now.
Well, we are going to wrap things up, guys. I want to thank you very much for this preview show. Phil and I are going to be live right after the pay-per-view up at youtube.com/postwrestling. And Phil, during the fights, where is the place to be for the post-wrestling world?
Oh, it's definitely in the MMA boxing chat in the Post Wrestling Discord, which you can join at postwrestling.com/Discord. Our man, Eryk, and myself are there most fight cards, and we certainly will be this pay-per-view. Eryk will be running fight predictions. We have a fight prediction leaderboard throughout the entire year. So you can join in the fun there. It's an added level of excitement to the event. And yeah, we'll be there through almost the entire card. So join us on Saturday night.
And Eryk will have you covered. He'll have reports for Bellator coming up on Friday night, and then UFC 263 on Saturday night. So what all are you going to be watching this weekend, Eryk? Because there's a ton of fight cards on this week.
I'll be watching Bellator and the UFC, and I watch those cards in their entirety, and that's 10 plus hours of MMA. That's enough for me this week, I think.
That's a good amount. I mean, Invicta's got a show. We've got the PFL last night, as we were discussing. A lot of stuff coming up this weekend. So keep it locked to postwrestling.com. We'll have the post show live right after UFC 263, running through all of the fights. And that is it for us. Thank you very much. You can follow these two. Eryk, where's the best place to send everybody to check out your work?
If you want to follow me on Twitter, my handle is Eryk Marcotte 705. And just come talk to me on the Discord. That's where I'm the most active. It's the best place to be. And
Phil, when's the podcast coming back?
That, you're the second person in 2 days who's asked me that.
Be honest, you hit such a high point. Your last guest, it's been really hard to follow. I can understand that thinking, but I think you should, someone needs to be up to the chore of trying to follow a monumental interview. So
first of all, you say all of that facetiously, but I would repeat it in complete earnesty. I'm so happy with that show. And if that were my last show, then that would be fine. But the reality is, unfortunately, towards the middle of last year, I had a lot of cancellations, and I was also working on some other some stories that I talked to you about that are a little bit bigger than a regular podcast, and so those are still in the works. So there is a plan to do something in the future. I just can't announce when. The show is not dead yet. But unfortunately nothing to report. But hey, look, we've got a podcast coming up on Saturday night, Sunday morning. So there's that to look forward to if the fans love my voice that much.
All right. And with that, we'll let you all know that it all goes down in the Discord. So go check it out. Postwrestling.com, button takes you right there. And then you can get the unfiltered Phil Chertok and Eryk Marcotte, where they are 24/7, usually having to deal with Brandon from New Jersey. So that is it for us. Thanks for everybody for listening, and we will speak with you Saturday night after UFC 263.